So it's time now to really get going on building our presentation. And I'd like to start out in this lesson by just talking a little bit about one of the fundamental concepts that you need to get your head around in PowerPoint, and that is slide layouts. Because this is something that you're going to encounter every time you add a brand new slide to your presentation. Now, I'm just going to work in the presentation that we created in one of the previous lessons. Currently, we just have one slide. Now, one thing that you'll notice about this slide is that it has on it what we call placeholders. And those are these rectangular boxes that you can see here. And I can select each one of them simply by clicking on the text. And that's exactly what these placeholders hold on this particular layout. They hold text. You can see the top one is basically a placeholder for me to add a slide title, and the one underneath is a placeholder for me to add a subtitle. And this is just a really nice quick way of me being able to input a title and a subtitle and make sure that they're centered on the slide. So let's just change this title. I'm just going to call it My First Presentation. And then in the subtitle, I'm going to add my name underneath. Nice and simple. We just need to type. Notice that when I click away, those text boxes disappear. When I click on the text, they reappear again. So what exactly are these placeholders? Well, these are related to the layout that I'm using on this first slide. Now, how do we find out what layout we're using? Well, we can jump up to the Home tab. In the Slides group, notice we have a layout drop-down. And you can see that currently I'm using a title slide layout. So in general, this is the layout you would use when you want to just add, as it says, a title to your presentation. But notice that we have lots of other different types of layout that we can apply to our slides. Now, what I can do from this layout drop-down is I can actually change the layout of this particular slide. So maybe I decide that now I just want the title only. I don't need a subtitle. I could change it to the title only layout. Now, because I already have text, it does its best to try and work that out, but it's giving me my title at the top, and I'm probably going to want to delete out this particular placeholder simply by selecting it and pressing delete. So now I have the title only layout applied to this presentation. What about if I was to change it to title and content? I get something completely different. So I still have my title placeholder, but now I also have a content placeholder. And in the middle here, this is a quick way to add a table, a chart, smart art, pictures, things like that. So the idea behind these layouts is to really give you a bit of a head start on the layout of your slide and also help you quickly add content to your slide as well. Also notice that it's given me bulleted text as well. So this layout basically assumes that I either want to type some bulleted items, or maybe I want to insert a picture, a table, a graphic, something like that. Now, I don't want to do any of those things. I'm going to switch it back to title slide. So that is how you can change the layout of an existing slide. What we can also do is in the same group, we can add a new slide and choose the layout that we want to use. So maybe on the next slide, I want a to content layout. If I click this, it gives me a title placeholder, and then I have two content placeholders where I can choose to add text or maybe add something else like a table or a picture. Now, it's worth remembering that each slide that you add to your presentation must have a layout applied to it, even if you're using the blank layout. So if we click back on slide number 2 and go back up to layout, notice that we have a blank just here. So if you just want to start from scratch and you don't want any placeholders or anything on the slide, you can choose blank layout. And I will say that for me, when I'm designing presentations, I tend to mostly start with a blank layout these days. I used to start with these different slide layouts, but now I tend to like to design mine from scratch. So in general, I'll use blank fairly frequently. Now, of course, if we go back to slide 1, we aren't restricted with these layouts as to the type of font and things that we can add. If I wanted to add a picture to this slide, I could. If I wanted to change the font, I could do that as well. Now, when you have placeholders, if I want to change the font of my first presentation, I could highlight the text go up to the Home tab and change the font, or I could just select the placeholder. Then if I go up and change the font to, let's change this to, let's go for Lato. This is one of my favorite fonts. I'm going to go for Lato Black. And there we go. So I don't necessarily have to highlight the text. Let's put my name back in here again. And let's change this. If I select the text box, and let's go up and change the font. So this time we're going to choose Lato again, but we're not going to go for Lato Black. We're going to go for Lato, like so. Notice that everything is nicely aligned in the middle, and I haven't really had to expend too much effort to do that. So there are some advantages to using these different content layouts. So be aware that they're there. Be aware that in order to change the layout of an existing slide, you go to the Layout drop-down. If you want to create a new slide with a different layout, you go to the New Slide drop-down. Now that we've got a couple of slides added to this first presentation, let's take a look at how we can add new slides, delete slides, and organize our slides. Now, currently, I have 2 slides in my presentation. If I want to add a brand new slide, we've already seen we can jump up to the New Slide drop-down and choose a specific layout. So if I choose another blank layout, I'm going to get another slide. Now notice that as you add slides, they're all numbered 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. Now what about if I want to duplicate or copy a slide? We have 2 options here. So let's say I want to make another copy of slide 1. What I could do is right click on the slide and I could choose to copy it, and then I can go somewhere else in my presentation, and you can see that wherever I click I get that red line. I could right click and then I can choose a paste option. So I'm going to select paste and it's going to paste that slide in. So copy and paste is a perfectly valid way of making a duplicate of a slide. You can also use the keyboard shortcuts Ctrl+C to copy and Ctrl+V to paste if you prefer. If we want to delete a slide, again, we can use our right-click menu and we have a delete slide option in the contextual menu. Or alternatively, we can just select the slide and press the delete key on our keyboard. Now, I showed you the method of copying and pasting, but the method that I use most often if I want to make a copy of a slide is duplicate. I just find it a little bit quicker. What you can do here is just press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+D, and that's going to create a duplicate of your slide. You can then move that slide into its correct position by simply dragging and dropping. So I can pick up this slide and I can just drag it down and drop it in its correct location in the presentation. So Ctrl+D is a great little keyboard shortcut that I find myself using all the time. Alternatively, if you go to the right-click menu, you can see that you also have that operation in there as well. Speaking of this right-click menu, whilst we're in here, we can also add a new slide from here as well. So I can click that and I'm going to get a new slide. I can also change the slide layout. So if I want to have this as a title and content slide, I can do that from there as well. So don't forget about that right-click menu, because you can access many of the relevant options in there as well without having to go to the ribbon. Now I'm just going to delete out that slide that we just added so that we just have these 4. What else can I do in here to organize my slides? Well, I could create sections for them as well. Now sections are particularly useful if you have a much longer presentation. It's nice to be able to organize them into logical sections, and sections enable you to kind of hone in on the information that you're interested in. So what I could do here is maybe I want these first 2 slides to be part of the introduction section and the second 2 slides to be about the team. So I can select these first 2 slides, hold down Shift to make multiple selections, and then I can jump up to the section drop down and choose Add Section. Notice it says Untitled Section at the top, and I can now give my section a name. So I'm going to call this Introduction and choose Rename. I can do the same with the remaining 2. So let's hold down Shift to select both of them, up to Section, Add Section, and this one is going to be called The Team. And let's click on Rename. And I could go through and carry on adding sections to give my presentation some structure. What it also allows me to do when I have sections in my presentation is I can collapse the section and really just focus on the parts of the presentation that I'm interested in. So this can be particularly useful. You can also collapse up all of the slides and just see those high-level headings if you want to. Now, if you want to make any modifications to these sections, maybe you decide that you want to change the name, again, you can right-click and you're going to have some options in there. So I can choose to rename the section. I can remove the sections and the slides all in one go, or I can choose to remove all sections in the presentation. I can move the section up, I can collapse all, or expand all. So if I choose collapse all, everything's going to be collapsed up. Expand all, it's going to come back again. Now what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to say remove all sections because I don't really want to add those as yet. One final shortcut key to show you here, if you want to quickly add a slide, you can press Ctrl M and that's going to give you another slide, and it will be based on the previous slide's layout. So because my previous slide was a blank, I'm getting a blank. If I click on my first presentation and do Ctrl M, I'm going to get the same layout as slide number 3. So just be aware of that when you're using that particular keyboard shortcut. The final button to point out in this little slides group up here is the reset button. And if we hover over, we're going to be able to see the screen tip for this. And it says that it resets the position, size and formatting of the slide placeholders to their default settings. So for example, on this first slide, I changed the font that's in use. So if I click on the reset button, you can see that it's going to reset it back to the font that was in use when I added this slide. And that's going to be the default font of Calibri Light. Reset's particularly useful if you've moved placeholders around and made quite a lot of changes and you just really want to reset it back to how it was originally in the layout. That's when that reset button can be super useful. One thing you might find yourself having to do fairly frequently is import slides from other presentations. So what exactly do I mean by that? Well, I know that when I worked at large corporations, quite often they might receive a presentation from a client that they need to incorporate into their sales pitch or something along those lines. So they want to bring in a few slides from the client presentation into their sales pitch. And what happens a lot of the time is that they will just simply try and copy and paste the slide, and then they'll come across all kinds of formatting issues. Because it might be that the client is using a completely different slide size. Maybe they're using a specific font that doesn't exist in your copy of PowerPoint. Maybe they're using images that you don't have access to, things like that. So all of these things you need to be careful of when you're importing slides in. Now with all that said, you can just copy and paste slides from one presentation to another. So let's take a look at that first, and then I'll show you another method. So I've very quickly opened up another PowerPoint presentation, and this is actually the one that I use for the titles of these lessons in this course, and you can also see some of the slides that I used in the introduction. So what about if I want to copy and paste a couple of these into my presentation? Well, as I said, you can copy and paste. So if I take slide 2, for example, I could right click, I could choose copy, and then I can go over to my slides pane, right click, and you can see I have a few different paste options. Now the first one says use destination theme. So whatever theme I have in use in this presentation, the slide that I'm copying in is going to take on that theme. Now remember, that might cause some changes to the original slide. What I could do is I could keep the source formatting. So if I want to keep whatever formatting is in use in the original, this is the option I would choose. Or I can choose to paste just as a picture. Now the problem when you paste it as a picture is that it becomes uneditable. You're effectively working with a picture of the slide as opposed to individual objects on a slide. So I would say that usually I don't choose this option. Now I'm going to choose the second one, keep source formatting. Let's click it and copy across. Now if we maximize this, I can see that it's come across pretty much exactly the same as the original. Notice that as I copied that across, I now get this little tag underneath which gives me some more paste options. So again, it's telling me I can choose to use the destination theme or I can choose to convert it to a picture. Now if I choose Use Destination Theme, you can see in this case it doesn't really change anything on the slide. It still looks exactly the same as the original. But it's worth noting that sometimes when you do this, you're going to notice changes depending on the formatting that's in use. So just be aware of that when you're copying and pasting slides. You might need to do some rearranging of the placeholders and maybe reformatting of certain elements. But as far as editing imported slides, you can edit them in exactly the same way. So everything is still clickable. I can make changes to the text, so on and so forth. So that's one way that you can copy slides from one presentation to another. Another way of doing this is to go up to the New Slide drop-down, and you can choose to reuse slides. Now I can choose the slides that I want to insert. So I'm going to browse and I'm going to go to the presentation that we were just using, which is this one just here. So let's click on Open. Now notice what happens in the pane on the right hand side. It loads up all of the slides that are contained within that presentation. And I can now choose which ones I want to insert. So maybe I want to insert this one, and this one. And I just have to click my mouse and it's going to add them into the presentation. Also notice at the bottom I have an option there to keep the source formatting. So this is a much quicker way of doing things if you have lots of slides that you want to import from one presentation. Another really nice quick way to add slides to a presentation is to import slides using an outline. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, well, what exactly does that mean? Let me show you an example. Now for this, we're going to jump across to Word. Now notice here, I simply have a Word document that has some headings. And this might be a plan for each of the slides that I've put together, but I've just done it in a Word document instead. So maybe I know that I want some slide titles to be Introduction, Meet the Team, Our Services and Our Products. And then underneath we have some subheadings. So maybe I create what we call an outline in Word, and then I want to import this into PowerPoint. Now the way that I've created this outline in Word is to jump into View and use Outline View. And this is just a quick way of creating these different headings. I've saved the document as outline.docx, and if you want to give this a go, this file is saved into the Course Files folder. Now if I click on Close and go back to PowerPoint, I can use that outline to create my slides for me. So for this, we're going to go to the Slides group again, click on New Slide, and notice at the bottom we have Slides from Outline. So now I can browse for my file, here it is, outline.docx, and click on Insert. And would you take a look at that? Like magic, I now have 4 new slides created based on the outline that I created in Word. So I've got the introduction with its subheadings, Meet the Team, Our Services, and Our Products. Now let's just take a look at the layouts that have been applied to these because we didn't specify a particular layout. So if I select the first one and jump up to layout, you can see this has a title and text layout. So there is my placeholder for the title and there is my placeholder for the text. Now also notice here that the text that's been imported is currently showing in Times New Roman font and it's showing in this blue color. Now that's because in the Word document the font was actually blue and I was using heading styles essentially. So it's imported them and converted them as best it can. So it might be that you now want to go in and reformat this text so that it matches your presentation. So if I wanted to change all of this to Lato font, I could go through and select each placeholder and change it to Lato, or I could very quickly replace fonts. So let's take a look at how we do that. If we go up to the Home tab, all the way over in the editing group at the end, notice we have Replace. So I'm going to go for Replace Fonts. You can see it's picked up that I have Times New Roman on this page, and then I can choose what I want to replace it with. So I'm going to say that I want to change this to, we're going to go for Lato. I'm going to scroll all the way down to L. There it is. Let's choose Lato and click on Replace. So that's a much quicker way of changing all of the fonts in my presentation. In this lesson, we're going to add a bit of color to our presentations and start taking a look at how we can change these slide backgrounds and also how we can apply themes. So let's start with the slide background. As you can probably tell, by default, when you add a slide into your presentation, the background color is simply going to be white. But it might be that you want to change that to something else. And I would say when you're thinking about changing the background color of the slide, always make sure that you adhere to those golden rules of PowerPoint presentations. Make sure that you have enough contrast between any text that you have on the slide and the background, so the background doesn't overwhelm the content of the slide. Now, in order to change the slide background, we need to go onto the Design tab. And you'll notice all the way over in the Customize group at the end, we have a Format Background option. And the screen tip says, fine-tune the formatting for your background or hide design elements from the current design. So if we click on Format Background, it's going to open this pane on the right-hand side, and we can choose how we want to fill that background. So maybe I want a solid fill color. And currently that color is set to white. But what I could do is click the drop down, and I'm going to see a palette that's divided into two groups, theme colors and standard colors. Now, the colors that you see in the theme colors color palette are very much related to the theme that you currently have in use in PowerPoint. Now, by default, you'll be using the standard Office theme in PowerPoint, and these are the colors that come with that theme. Now, if you're wondering what theme you are using, again, on the Design ribbon in the Themes group, if we click the drop down to open up the Themes gallery, you can see at the top there it says This Presentation, and if I hover my mouse over, you can see that I'm using the Office theme and it's being used by all slides. But we have many, many other themes that we can choose from in this gallery, which we're going to take a look at in a moment. But for now, we're using the Office theme, and these are the colors that come with that theme. Underneath, we then have standard colors. So these are your standard colors that aren't part of any particular theme, but you have your general red, green, orange, blue, yellow, that kind of thing down there. What you also have is a more colors option. So if you want to be very specific about the color that you're using and you can't find it in the theme colors or the standard colors, you can choose from this little palette just here, or really get granular and choose from a custom theme palette. And you can really choose any color from here simply by dragging your mouse over this gradient panel, and you can modify this to see if you want it lighter or if you want it darker. If you have a very specific color that you need to use at your company, maybe you have branded colors that you need to use, you can grab the hexadecimal value from your marketing team or whoever looks after your templates, and you can simply type it in there to get the exact color. So a myriad of different options. Now we're just going to stick with our theme colors at the moment. Let's go for a light blue. And as you would expect, that's going to apply that to the slide that we have selected. If I wanted to apply that to multiple slides, I would need to select them in the slides pane. So if I click on slide 2 and then hold down my shift key and click on slide 6, that's going to select all of the slides in between. I can then go back to my palette and choose that same light blue color, and it's now applied to all of the slides. Notice that we also have a transparency slider, so I can drag it up to make it more transparent or drag it down to make it more opaque. What about gradient fill? Well, if I click that, I get an entirely different effect, which can look really nice in some situations. We have some preset gradients in here, so if I want to change this to a completely different color, so let's go for maybe a lighter green, I can choose them from there. I can choose the type of gradient that I'm using, so this is really sort of the way it grades: linear, radial, rectangular. I'm sure you can see some slight changes there to the way it looks, path, so on and so forth. I can choose the direction that that shading goes, the angle, and even my gradient stop. So I can really kind of adjust how this gradient moves across this slide. And if I wanted to, I could choose to have different colors. So maybe I want it to go from a blue down to a green. If I click on this gradient stop, I can then change the colour. So let's go from a dark blue, and you can sort of see how that's starting to look. And then I can click on the next gradient stop, and maybe I want to make that a slightly lighter blue. You can see how this is kind of working. Click on the third gradient stop. Let's go for an even lighter blue. And now the whole thing's basically blue. So let's change that back to green, like so. And then I can adjust these by moving those gradient stops to get a completely different effect. So you can really get very granular with your customizations here. What about if I want to fill the background with a picture or a texture? Well, we have an option for that as well. Now, as soon as I click on picture or texture fill, it's going to fill it with the default texture, which is kind of this, I'm not really sure what that is, maybe grainy wood or something like that. But I also have a gallery of textures that I can choose from in here. So I will say that I don't think I have ever used these in a PowerPoint presentation, but if you want to, they are there as well. Something that I do use all the time is a picture as a background, and we're going to talk a lot more about this at the end of this section. What we can do is click on Insert, and then we can choose a picture. Now, just for quickness, I'm going to choose a stock image just here, and let's just insert this picture of a flower. I'm going to choose this and click on Insert. And there we go. We have a lovely background image filling this page. Now, not all images that you insert into the background will look quite as good as this. Some of them have sizing issues, some of them end up looking a bit distorted, and I'm going to show you how you can overcome all of those issues at the end of this section. But just be aware that you can fill a background with a picture or a texture. What about the final one here, pattern fill? Well, as you would expect, we have different patterns that we can choose from. And of course, we can customize the foreground color as well. So maybe I want these to be orange instead. And some of these can actually look really effective, although some of them do make you feel a little bit cross-eyed. Now also notice, let's select something not quite as harsh. Let's go for that. If I wanted this background applied to all of my slides, notice right at the bottom I have an Apply to All button. So with one click, I can just apply that to everything in my presentation. So really nice and straightforward. Now I don't want any of these fills, so I'm going to switch it back to solid fill, and I'm going to put it back to white, and I'm going to say Apply to All. The final thing I want to talk to you about in this section is just to go back very briefly to the different themes in PowerPoint. As we saw, we can click the drop down to jump into the themes gallery. I can see the theme currently in use in this presentation, and then underneath I have all of these different themes. And you can see as I hover over them, I'm getting that live preview in the background. And whilst this pane is kind of covering, you can kind of get the idea here. It's going to apply a different theme. So if I choose this one, for example, it's going to apply that theme to all slides in my presentation. Now, a theme in general will include a background, it will include fonts, and it will also include colors and effects. Now, it might be that I really like this background, but I don't particularly like the font that comes with this theme. Well, I can change that. Notice we have a variants group at the top here. So each theme has a number of different variants. So if I decide that I would prefer to have a dark red version of this theme, I can choose the dark red variant. And if I click the drop down just here, I can then choose very specifically the colors that I want to use. So maybe I want to choose something completely different. I can choose the fonts that I have in use. So maybe I would prefer to use Segoe UI, and I can choose different effects. Now, these are more obvious when you have things like shapes in your presentation, because you're going to see things like shadows, reflections, things like that. But all of these things can be customized. And then finally, we have background styles at the bottom, which is really just another way of getting into a format background. These are rather plain backgrounds that you can quickly apply with the click of one mouse. So just remember that the theme that you're using is very important, because it not only controls the background, the fonts that are in use, but it also controls the color palette that you have access to. If I now take a look at my home ribbon and jump into the font colors, notice that the palette of colors here is very much relevant to the new theme that I've chosen. If I switch my theme back to Standard Office and go to the Home tab, my colors are now related to that particular theme. It's time now to do exercise 3, where we're going to practice some of the skills we've learnt in relation to slides and layouts. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to create a new blank presentation. I'd then like you to add the following slides: a comparison slide, a to content slide, and also a blank slide. I'd then like you to duplicate the blank slide. So you should end up with 5 slides in your presentation when you take into account the title slide that's there by default. I'd then like you to rearrange the slides so that the to content layout slide directly follows the title slide. I'd then like you to practice adding text and content using the placeholders. So in slides 1 to 3, I'd like you to add the text that you can see in the screenshots, or your own text. That's absolutely fine. To add the image, you're going to need to download the image corporate_training.jpg from the course files folder. And again, I'd like you to use the content placeholder to insert it. I'd then like you to apply the Ion theme to all slides in the presentation, and then save the presentation to your desktop or a folder of your choice as myfirstpresentation.pptx. I'd then like you to close the presentation. That's it for this exercise. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing I asked you to do here was to create a brand new blank presentation. And there are a couple of ways you could do this. You could open up PowerPoint and press Ctrl N. Alternatively, you can go to File and select Blank Presentation from Home, or you can go to New and select Blank Presentation from here. And you should see by default you get a title slide. I then asked you to add 3 more slides to your presentation. So we're going to go to the New Slide drop down. So we want to add a comparison slide, a to content slide, and also a blank slide. I then asked you to duplicate the blank slide. So Ctrl D is the quickest way to do that. I then asked you to rearrange your slides so that the to content slide, which is this one just here, directly follows the title slide. So all we need to do here is drag and drop. Now the next part of the exercise was just to practice adding text and images to the first 3 slides. So let's click here. We're going to say marketing presentation, and we want to add our name underneath. On the next slide, we want this to say about us. And there is our bullet pointed text. Now, I didn't mind if you added in your own text. It's just really to practice using these placeholders. I then asked you to insert an image corporate_training.jpg. And you'll find this image in the exercise files folder. So for this, we want to use the content placeholder. So this is the one to add a picture. Let's click it. We need to navigate to the folder where we have the image stored, select it, and click on Insert. And then we just need to add text to this final slide. So this one is called Our Services. We're going to have a little subheading, What We Can Do For You. And there is our content. The next thing I asked you to do was to apply the Ion theme to all slides in the presentation. So for this, we need to jump up to the Design tab and find the Ion theme. And I think Ion is this one just here. So let's select it. I then asked you to save this presentation to your desktop or a folder of your choice as myfirstpresentation.pptx. So for this, we need to jump up to File, Save As. We can then browse for a folder, make sure that we have the correct file extension, and type in the file name and click Save. Now I already have one in this folder, so I'm going to replace mine, and it's as simple as that. The final thing I asked you to do was just to simply close the presentation. So you could simply use the keyboard shortcut Ctrl W, or you can go to File and Close.